So hey, welcome back to my channel, Wanderlust. I wanted to talk about maybe start digging into the poem a little bit more. Um, One of the things, some of the rules of the chase, some of the things that people have asked. So, and I do agree. I've been staying away from talking about the actual poem. I definitely wanted to hit on a bunch of other points, and so one of them is so Forrest Fenn is a multi-million dollar art collector and who hid a treasure chest alleged, to be worth millions of dollars. Now, there's been a lot of speculation just recently that the contents of it is gold and the price of gold fluctuates. On the Today Show in 2013, he did an interview, and Forrest Fenn's done. He has had many interviews that have been recorded, and early on, those early interviews, it seems as though he was less guarded in the clues that he gave and the information he gave. I find that to be interesting to listen to those early interviews. So, some of the, in that early interview from the Today Show, he divulges an important, so one of the things that he talked about in the interview, and I'm going to read from that, is what has the reaction been like from you? And Forrest Fenn responds, well, it's been hectic. My website crashed for 7 hours yesterday because it had so many hits. And the interviewer says, okay, we've talked you into something. How about giving us another clue this morning? And he says, well, I'm not going to put an X on the map for you, which is interesting because he has continued to refer to where lines cross and an X on a map in multiple interviews. Now, this could just be his way of obfuscating and not having to, or moving away from providing an answer. It just could be his quip about, hey, I'm not going to just tell you where it is. So he says, well, I'm not going to put an X on the map for you. And he says, no. And then the interviewer says, well, how about another clue? And Forrest Fenn says, the treasure is higher than 7. And then he pauses and then he says, then 5,000 feet above sea level. And when she presses him, he says, can you give me more than that? He says, no. Later on, in other interviews, he divulges that it's above 5,000 feet in elevation, somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, and below 10,200 feet. And that is a very odd number to give. Instead of giving a round number, I mean, 10,200 feet is a round number, but it is weird that he gives the elevation as 10,200 feet above sea level, and the lower limit is 5,000 feet above sea level. And that is this 10,200 feet thing is definitely, I mean, why didn't he say 10,000 feet? Why? Why add the 200 extra feet? Uh, it's very odd number. Why did he throw that in there? Just recently, in one of the last interviews he did, where he did the 7 questions, in the seventh question interview that he just did, and he said it would be his last interview, he alluded to something about that he flew his airplane into the teeth of the Rockies and at 200 feet. So to this very day, another thing that's very important, I think, also to most searchers was that these heights of sea level in the Rocky Mountains exclude large areas immediately, because if you go on a topographical map, And I like this site. It's called My Topo. It's free, and if you click right on the online maps, and if you say, let me think of a site. If we say Cody, Wyoming, we're given a really nice, high quality. Let me make this full screen topographical map of Cody, Wyoming, and if you zoom in, we can see the the lines of topology, the elevations above sea level. And this, so for the most part, almost all of Cody, Wyoming is above 5,000 feet. You're down by the river here. It drops, but then comes back up. So, if you were going to say, hey, I think it's on Cedar Mountain, and there's a radio tower, it's definitely, you can see the topographical lines. It is above 5,000 feet and below 10,000. So this area would be fair game, for an area where he would hide the treasure chest. So another rule of the game, or a lot of people refer to them as sort of the rules of the chase, that is that when pressed in the interview, and the rule basically sums up to that the treasure is not associated with any structure. And when pressed on that, Forrest Fenn said there's no need digging in old outhouses. The treasure is not associated with any structure. So that is in many ways problematic, and a lot of one an issue is structure. Did what does he mean by structure? And the definition of structure is, so there's more than one definition of structure. I mean, as a noun, it says, the dictionary says it's an arrangement of and relationship between the parts of elements of something complex. Synonym is construction, form, formation. As a verb, structure is to construct or arrange according to a plan. But if you go to Webster's dictionary, the first definition is of structure is the action of building, construction. The second definition is something such as a building that is constructed. Third definition is the manner of construction. And fourth definition, the arrangement of particles or parts of a substance of a body. And fifth is the arrangement of elements of any entity and their relationship to each other. So when he says it's not related to any structure, it's kind of weird. The act of building, construction, people immediately jump to, when you say a structure, you think of a bridge, a building, a house. And it's definitely a flip floppy kind of answer that many searchers, if you, they will point back to this statement about the structure that is not associated with any structure. And so if you say, I think it's associated with the Denver Museum, then they're going to say, well, that's a structure. And immediately it's discounted. Whereas if you read the definition of structure, it's maybe a little more of a gray area, but it definitely creates this vibe where, in my opinion, where a lot of people will just completely discount a solve or an idea because it's some kind of a building or a structure like a bridge or an overpass or anything man-made is immediately discounted, and that could be a mistake. I think another one too that Fenn has done repeatedly is that he will give these like open-ended answers or even closed-ended answers where the closed ends are sort of pointing outwards, so that it's you're sort of stuck in between. You're like, is it this thing over here, or is it that thing over there, or is it something in between, or is it on the outside of what he was saying? And I think he's also done the same thing with closed-ended answers where both ends are pointing inwards. So you're always sort of stuck between, like, this tautology is he's saying do this but don't do this, but it's like, which one? Wait a minute, is it? And I think that creates confusion when people start. And I think the structure thing is an example of that. On the same vein of thought or talking, is that he's referred to don't go to outhouses, and he specifically said it's not in a graveyard, and also for safety. At one point, he said that it's not associated with a cave or any kind of mines because those are dangerous. They have snakes and they could have cave-ins. So yeah, and one of the treasure is not in the graveyard. He said that straight up. You know, answering, I think, along the same vein as some of these clues that have been given over time, is that pretty controversial. Is that so? If somebody, as soon as somebody says, "Hey, I put this treasure box with $1 million of gold somewhere in the Rocky Mountains in these four states: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and north of Santa Fe in the state of New Mexico," the first one of the first things that comes to my mind is he buried it. And the word buried, he went out with a shovel and dug a hole in the ground. And that's how most, if you think of hidden treasure or you think of Treasure Island or anybody who hides a treasure, one of the first things that they do, you bury a treasure. You dig a hole and you put that treasure in a hole and you cover it up. And the interesting thing is that Forrest Fenn has categorically said, and the quote from him from the interview on the Today Show in 2013 is he says, I didn't say it has not been buried. I said I hid it, but that doesn't mean it isn't buried. So that's another example of this kind of weird open-ended, closed-ended a statement. I mean, and he uses these double negatives. He says, I did not say it has not been buried. So you got to, like, kind of parse that. Uh, you know, I did say that it has been buried. He's saying I did not say it has not been buried. So first he says, I never said that it was buried or not. And then he goes on to say, well, I hid it. But then he adds this, throws that in and says, but it doesn't mean that it is not buried. So, and in subsequent interviews, there's a very specific interview where it's a woman who's interviewing him, and she continues to say in the interview, she continues to say buried. When she refers to the treasurers speaking with him multiple times, she keeps saying buried. And the first time she says it in the interview, Forrest Fenn sort of jumps on her and says, "No, I hid it." And near the end of the interview, she says several more times that it's buried. And he actually gets, for the first time ever, I think, in an interview, he gets a little angry, or he quips at her and says, "Look, honey," or something like that. He says, "I didn't, you keep saying it's buried, and I never said that. Yours keeps saying it's buried, and I'm saying that it's hidden." And so, but that is that's another thing that happens multiple times. If you start listening to Forrest Fenn over time, he has, again, I'm keep using this example of open-ended and closed-ended statements where he's kind of, there's sort of these contradictions, because in this 2013 interview he said I hid it, but it does not mean it isn't buried. And then later on, in these later interviews, I think it was 2018 interview, he's categorically denied that he buried it. But he makes the same point that he did in the 2013 interview, which is consistent, is that he says, I hid it. So, which kind of opens up a whole ball of wax of, what do you mean by, what does he mean by hid?